I know there's one other thing about the clerics I wanted to bring up, but I can't remember it offhand. One of the other things I did want to bring up is the fact that you forgot to check for traps. And not that you didn't forget to check for traps, period. It's just that you didn't say you were checking for traps on the wall or behind the door after you checked the door for traps. I think that style of play slows things down. And for players who lose a character that they maybe have invested in because they didn't stop at every single thing and say, I check for traps behind the door, on the door, below the door, all those sorts of things, that's disregards an adventurer's just natural ability to notice something.
I am reminded of a game I got to play in a while back that was run by my buddy, our buddy, I think everybody's on his Gamerhood Discord, Jason Hobbs. My main character in his open table had been turned to stone by an unfortunate encounter with a basilisk. However, I had an alt, and we spun her out, and we were out on adventure. We came across a chest, which we prodded, we poked, we checked for traps officially, we did all manner of your standard adventurer precautions, and then we opened it, and there were some scrolls inside. So I popped it out and I said, okay, I'm going to read the scroll. I did not check the scroll case, which in fact was trapped. I proceeded to blow up half the party. I think he killed 3 or 4 out of our 8 people because of the fire trap that was on that scroll. And it got better because the scroll was a cure poison, and one of our party was poisoned and then later died. So not only did I kill everybody immediately, but I also killed that guy because we could have saved him, but no. Now, that's sort of in what you're talking about, but sort of not, because I think it's fair to put the trap on the scroll case, because one, that actually mirrors the fiction better. In some of the Vance stories that I've read recently, some of the sword and sorcery type stuff that I remember from years past, comic books, graphic novels, or antique prose, it was more common to put the trap on the book or on the case than it was on the bookshelf or the door to the room. And so that kind of comes down to a type of gaming, and you have to think about where should a trap be. I've also played in games where there were traps randomly, and that stunk because you don't want a random trap, because that doesn't make sense. A trap should have a reason for existing, because if it doesn't, then you have these adventurers go, okay, we go for door check plan Zeta, and you end up spending, it kind of becomes rote, it becomes formulaic. You automatically check every single door, and that, while role playing it out, I've been in games where it didn't work too poorly, because I was like, okay, I do this, and this, and I'm like, okay, that's attack plan Zeta, and we'll do that whenever I say that. And then other games where you just roll it, that's more the adventurer passive that you're talking about, or not passive, but this is what an adventurer would know to look for. You roll for it, and you have that 1 or 2 and 6 depending on your character, and you find them pretty frequently. A lot of people complain that 1 in 6 isn't that good of a chance, but when you've got 6 player characters and 12 hirelings, you're going to hit a lot of 6s, and it's just a matter of how many people are you going to spend, how many turns are you going to spend looking for it, and it becomes a time investment. How much light do we have left, kind of deal. And anyway, the important part is it's a sort of style of play kind of deal. So if you have a more dungeon-y focused, I think it's makes more sense to have them in good places. Like, there is a choke point here to get between faction A and faction B's areas. It's trapped. I'm going to check for a trap there, because this is where I would put a trap if I was trying to keep people out of my territory. Chests, treasure chests. Literally always check the treasure chest, because who in their right mind is going to leave their treasure chest unguarded? Now, the vast majority, I think, I say vast, but more treasure chests will be untrapped than trapped. A lot of treasure chests will be guarded, and that's the hazard behind them. And some of them will be hidden. Hidden is another good thing. You're buried, and so not all treasure chests will be trapped. But we're playing a fantasy adventure game, so you're gonna check them. And so you think about the logical places of where traps are, and then your player skill comes into play, and you begin to pick out, okay, this is where a trap logically should be. There's the board game version where you look at, I think, Hero Quest. If you Hero Quest, the trap is a hit point thing. It's like you hit a trap, lose 2 life, and that's just it. And it's more of a tax on your resources than it is role play or a skillful thing. And that's more the board game approach. And then at the side, you have the total opposite end of that coin is you have the theater hour role players, where traps are less of a it's an impediment to moving the story along. So in part, I think it's a player skill item, and in part, I think it's a play style item. So hopefully that little ramble made sense. So I do largely agree with you. If everything is trapped, if everything is messed up, then that's not fair. That's going to mess up the experience for everybody. But without traps, then what's the purpose of the finding traps process?
And the actual mechanics of, I don't really care so much for, but whether it's when you specifically say that you're checking for traps, you might get an advantage, or if when you don't say it, you have a passive, either a passive number or a passive roll that the game master can check against. Something like that, as opposed to, ha, gotcha, you didn't say specifically what I want you to say, or you didn't do it just the way I wanted you to do it. I think that also is a disrespect for the player who's invested all this time in a character that they like, just to throw all that away because of a technicality.
I agree on the principle that it is a jerk move for a ref to say, aha, you said you checked the table legs, but you didn't specify that you checked the skirt. That is the little webbing that goes between the table legs underneath the tabletop. But so that's obviously something they would look for. You should give them a chance. I think I want to step back from a passive ability. So elves have that, and dwarves have that. Dwarves will note slanting passages. Elves will have a chance to note secret doors, but that's kind of a special thing. So I don't want to turn everything into a die roll, because then it's more about luck than it is about skill. Conversely, that's kind of the direction that some of the newer editions ended up going. Third edition in particular, breaking away from player skill and kind of diving headlong into put dice into it. And with third edition, the answer was builds. Your character class had things it could do, and so you would focus on certain things, do certain things, and the dice rolls would come up in your favor based on how your character looked, or not looked, but you know what I mean. So we don't necessarily want to go full board game, because I like introducing that element of skill and that element of learning. And I'll be truthful, my experiences as a player and a ref, when a party figures something out and wins because of their wits instead of rolling dice, they love that. That sticks in their mind. That sticks in. They tell that story later at the Waffle House. Have I been using this expression a lot? I need to start doing that. So I'm thinking about calling some of my old buddies who used to run those old leagues. I'm tempted to call some of my current buddies and doing some co-op episodes and just going, so hey, nothing in particular. Let's show up and talk about the games you're in, because I know that I put a great deal of my gaming online. I know that a lot of my friends stream a lot of their games, and that's well and good, but we are in the extreme minority. I've posted like 12 actual plays. In the time when I have been in those 12 actual plays, I've played 100 times, easy. And the vast majority of gaming happens off screen, and that's a good thing. That's what the game is for. We want you to focus. I want the players, not directing this at you, James, but you, the listener. I want you to enjoy the game. It's not about production. It's not about being a D-list celebrity with a podcast 100 people listen to. No, it's about playing the game and enjoying, figuring out those puzzles, beating those monsters, coming back with their stuff. It's about the enjoyment. It's about the fellowship. There's so much to it, and the fact that we put it online, for me, it's more of an archive. It's like, okay, I am not going to remember, because I get to run a game very infrequently. I'm not going to remember what happened session to session, and this allows me to go back and check, just visually check what happened. And so I say that the majority of games are offline. So what I want to do is I want to get people I know who are playing games, who are doing interesting things, who I talk to with some degree of regularity, and ask them. We'll just talk about games. What are we playing? What are we doing? That people loved that for OSR October. I got a lot of positive feedback for talking about game examples instead of gossip or theory. Just saying, okay, we played and this is what we did. Listeners were telling me that they really like that, and so it's like, why not make that a segment? Just call up a buddy, talk about gaming for half an hour, and call it a day. So I may start doing those. I was tentatively going to call that the Waffle House Diaries, just because that's when I was running that league. That's what we always did. We would go to the Waffle House after all the games finished up, and then as the DMs laugh about what our crazy players had done, who weren't there to defend themselves. But anyway, I'm going off on a tangent there. But the end-all be-all of where I was trying to go with this is, I think having an element of skill will benefit the player. So I don't want it to be passive perception. And I'm not going to harp on people who enjoy that kind of game. I get it. But for me, I feel like it is a better experience overall for the players when they win, and not as much when the dice win for them. So I wouldn't do a passive per se, but I would definitely allow for stuff like that to fall into place. That is, stuff like, I'm backing into in case I sound a little weird, it's because I'm backing into a parking space. I know I say I do this on a Bluetooth, and so it's technically legal and safe, but man, I probably ought to park the car. But park the car before I start talking.
And this is a good segue into the disrespect of players at the table. You had brought up a group that was playing, I believe, Pendragon, and there was a beautiful thing that played out story-wise, where one particular player wound up being betrayed in such a major way that while it made for a good story, it was not a good player experience. And that I think that when you come to a table, you should show respect to every single person, regardless of what might be good for the story.
Yes, sir. I believe that was Carl Rodriguez over at the GMologist Presents. He has a great story about a long-running Pendragon campaign that ended with the betrayal of one of the knights, which damaged the relationship of the players. So it was a big moment for the game, as I recall.
The exceptions, of course, being if you're playing an entirely chaotic group, that's just to be expected that you're going to do that. If you're entering into a play style where those sorts of things are to be expected, or if you just know your group well enough that that this would not bother them, the hours and effort they've expended into their character, then of course there are those caveats. But I think that it still remains, as a general rule, that player respect should be above any sort of story decisions.
I am not big on PvP in my fantasy adventure games, and part of it is from that player respect aspect. Because, one, you think about it from a player perspective, you're not going to have a lot of choice in terms of who you play with. Now, this is less true than it used to be. In the age of online gaming, it is so easy to find a new group to play with, and it is so easy to get into other games. And as a DM or as a referee, you have such a huge player pool to draw from. You can pick and choose who you play with. That wasn't always the case. If you're playing in a person and there's only a handful of folks you know who are interested, it's hard to kick a problem player. It's hard because you can't replace them. Similarly, if you're playing in an open table, it's not always true that you're gonna get to pick who you adventure with. You're at the comic shop and you're not sure who's sitting down. You're even online. There's some new folks. You don't know how they think. There's some folks who the DM hadn't kicked yet, and you don't necessarily want to trade out the alt for it. It's like you don't necessarily have that much of a choice in certain circumstances. So it's important to match expectations. I remember in a separate forum I'm on, someone was lamenting open tables because they would have a character they worked really hard on. That is not to say they thought up an intricate backstory, had the perfect character build and the arc they planned. No, they played the character. They showed up, they took their hard knocks, they leveled up, but then the character got offed because another player goofed off and did not take dungeon hazards seriously, and they didn't care. And so that kind of burned their shorts, and I can see that. Risk is an implicit part of the game, but that risk should be calculated in the dungeon, not something that you put up with because you are forced to play with people who don't care. So from that perspective, I'm not a big fan of PvP. One, the expectations for the game should align between the players, and ideally with the ref too, but at the same time too, don't mess. So if you want to shank the other guy who's level 3, it's not easy to get to level 3. I say that it's easier to get there as certain classes than others, and some games you'll advance pretty quickly, but the point is, the bigger the investment, the bigger the stab it is if you betray your party. And so it's not when you don't have as much choice like that, when you can't, your choice is to either just skip and avoid the game, or and then this is where troop play comes in. Just have an alt that you can run. But yeah, if you don't have an alt, if you don't have the option, then you're risking. You're putting your character at risk for someone else's behavior, and that's not cool. Similarly, I have been enjoying the Jack Vance Cudgel stories lately. Cudgel is a right rapscallion. I'll leave it at that. Yeah, Cudgel is the thief class, just flat out. If people tell you otherwise, they are wrong. But the point is, he is a bad person, and he travels alone for the most part, and he does bad things to other people. But as a player in a game, would he last? Because he doesn't have a party around him, and anyone he's with suffers with him. So it makes sense to me that if the party members were behaving like that, they wouldn't be a party for very long. They wouldn't be able to keep a party because, one, people learn. Other people notice when your hirelings never come back. And if I'm a hireling, I don't know if I'm going to be hiring on with a 100% fatality rate. Also, if I am an adventurer, I don't know if I'm going to agree to a split share with somebody who I think is going to gank me to get that share on the way back. So, logically, recall, players don't necessarily have this choice. If you're thinking in universe, in world, you absolutely have a choice. Grab the other dude, hire the henchman yourself. As henchmen, just group together. Who cares? You'll be first level in no time. So, in world, it doesn't make sense to me that a PvP enthused character would exist in a party environment. It's simply not conducive to having a party. So it doesn't make sense in fiction. And then lastly, as a combination of the two, the games I run are very exploration and adventure centric. Now, James, you were saying the word story a lot, and that kind of pricks my ears because, like I mentioned in my last episode, I have kind of a hang up, not a hang up, but when I think a story is more about telling what happened at the table. And so I'm not going to speculate as to what kind of games you prefer. That's not my intent. But I will specify the kind of game that I tend to run, and the kind of game that I tend to play in on over time is very dungeon and hex crawl centric. So where I was going with this, dungeons are dangerous. Dungeons are not somewhere where you're going to goof around. The people who goof around are going to be the people who get killed. So, from that perspective, I don't think that See, there I was. I was almost smart enough to park the car before I started talking. I don't think that an adversarial player, a player versus player, someone who is not taking the game seriously, someone who is doing stuff to betray their allies. And now I have friends and people I know who will say there's no honor among thieves and there's no rule of law in the dungeon. I just don't think that character would last. They would either lose party or they would get themselves killed, because the dungeon, it literally has dripping slimes from the ceiling that will end you. There are places where gas will come out of the floor and it will end the entire party. When you're in a situation where you might walk up against a 9-foot tall creature that regenerates everything you hit it with, that's not a place to stab your buddy in the back. Now, will you kneecap them so you can run away faster? Don't need to. They're in armor. You're good to go there, thief jerk. But where I'm going with this, I don't tend to go for adversarial behavior between players because the dungeon is dangerous enough. And you're just as likely to, if you're trying to betray your buddies on the way out of the dungeon, say, to get a better share of the treasure, you're going to just as likely run into something nasty on the way back to town. And so it is against the best interests of an adventurer to betray their buddies. You don't get to spend treasure that gets taken by the 30 to 300 bandits that you can't hold off. My 2 cents there.
Hey Taylor, Daniel from Bandits, keep calling in. Great episode on plot. Well, I stopped after you finished that. I'm about to listen to the call-ins, so looking forward to that as well. But I wanted to give my 2 cents or 3 cents or...
Definitely 3 cents. Don't sell yourself short, my friend. To be so bold, I would say that might as well even be a nickel.
Excellent episode. I really like your breakdown. What I think is funny is it comes down to language, right? And that was my first response, right? Was how we say things. Because to you, the word plot means something very specific, and you're like, oh, okay, this means the player is thinking this. But of course, I knew the player wasn't thinking that. But I'm speaking in a public forum, so I have to be wary that that could be the impression. And what's interesting is last week's session, a brand new player who's only played for us with a couple months. I was asking them where they wanted to go, and she said, "Oh, well, Daniel wants us to go in this dungeon. He spent all that time making it." And that same player who used the word plot said, "No, Daniel doesn't care where we go. Wherever we go, the story goes. He's not going to send us any direction that we don't want to go," which tells you where that player stands. So it's really interesting.
Regarding the P word, I wish that Anchor hadn't nuked the fridge when it came to the voice messaging, because I had 3 or 4 minutes worth of commentary that I was sending your way. I only got the one through before I realized it's just, it wouldn't do it. So my intent was, and I wish I had been able to follow through, to come back, use the web API, and do it from a laptop where I had a better mic, but it just didn't happen. So, but not to backtrack or anything, and not to toady, but based on the actual plays that you have run, Daniel, I have never had a chance to play with you. I have not had a chance to play with your players. Just schedules don't line up. But based on those actual plays, the early Bandits Keep channel, the Bandits Keep actual play supplemental channel, having watched a great deal of those, I know the kind of game that you run. I think your players know the kind of game that you run, and the fact that they keep coming back means that's the kind of game they expect. And so, truthfully, when I heard a play, I don't know which player it was, but coming from one of your players, I could assume that the term plot level curse, I would take that as a joke. If I were at the table, I would chuckle at that, because it's invoking a naughty word, so to speak, a a naughty concept, the absurdity of which being, yes, the remove curse may not work, but it's not for this reason. So it would have been that kind of, I would have taken it as a joke. Continuing to think about the meaning of words, that's one of the big things. So whenever I make an argument or whenever I make a statement, I try to define what I'm talking about in advance. And I do a bad job of it usually, but that's okay because I can then make a second episode with call-ins. But definitely the different expectations that when two people say the same thing and two other people hear two different things, you've come up with 4 ideas, and the importance of communication, the intrigue behind figuring out what those expectations are and where those expectations come from is a big part of the expository medium. So I was off on a little tirade there. I don't know where I was going with it, but the end game is watch the Bandits Keep actual play channel. Thanks for calling in, Daniel. And thanks for giving me fodder for another episode.
And that's actually going to be a good segue into one of my additional thoughts. You had made a statement about not making fun of a certain style of play, and I certainly don't advocate anybody trying to walk so carefully that they're on eggshells, try not to offend anybody. Not that we should try and show respect to people, but I find it interesting because whatever side you're on of any particular thing, that there are certain things we so closely identify with that when it gets attacked, we feel attacked. If someone attacks old school style of playing, then many of us will feel defensive. And same thing on the other side. If we make fun of story games, other people would be offended by that.
But story gamers deserve it. Yeah, no, but more seriously, I hear you, because I have had recent vintage noticed of myself that in other situations, in other forums, that if I hear someone talking about a game which patently is not OSR in a manner as though it were, poppycock, this is unacceptable. But which is absurd. I never reply. I never engage. And do people actually argue about whether things are or are not OSR? I swear it's the same 2 people who think they're trolling each other and they're just getting a kick out of it on their own. But man, there's no point. Why do what other people play matter? Because it's not, if they're not at your table, it doesn't affect your life in any way. If they didn't happen to post about it online, you wouldn't have even known they existed. So I don't get why people get bent out of shape about it, but I understand. And so that's the biggest reasons why, like you said, it's important not to walk on eggshells, because at that point you've taken the fun out of the conversation. But yeah, I feel you, because it's I always try to specify that I'm coming from my own perspective, and that while part of the terms and conditions is I'm going to respect that other people enjoy different things than I do, even when those things are wrong.
I just think that it would be much better if we as people were able to do a lot better job of recognizing when a person is being attacked as opposed to an idea. Because I don't expect everybody to like the way I play certain games. And so maybe it's just the heart that we approach things to that we should just be more careful about without having to walk on eggshells around everybody.
I wonder how much of it has to do with identity. Because you think about it, if role-playing is part of your essence, if OSR gaming is part of who you are as a human, then by nature you will self-identify with the criticisms made thereby. Same as some folks with religion. Religion is a huge part of our lives, and when someone attacks the very concept, then it burns. Yeah, because it's a core element to your essence, then it becomes personal. Food for thought. And that wraps up another episode of the Clerics Wear Ringmail podcast, an independently operated product released for educational and informative purposes under the You Can Totally Steal This license. As always, sound effects are from mixkit.co used under the Mixkit royalty-free license. Segments recorded in a vehicle are recorded using a Bluetooth hands-free device, and Clerics Wear Ringmail assumes no liability in the consumption or distribution of the podcast. By listening, all parties agree. Any parties with questions can reach out on the Clerics Wear Ringmail blog, and parties who are dissatisfied can go suck an egg. Thank you for listening, everybody, and delve on.